Rosie, welcome. And this is the next installment of our series of Heterodox social science fellows, center fellows. Your background is quite distinct and fascinating. You're an internationally acclaimed choreographer, founder of K2CO. I don't know if we'll come into that, but you've had a career spanning 2 decades and acclaimed works, including Five Soldiers, MK Ultra, and Fantasia. You were a Leverhulme artist in residence at Oxford, and also you are a trustee of Dance Consortium, chair of the programming group, and director, of course, of Freedom in the Arts. So I guess just stepping back from this, a little bit about background. How did you get into choreography and dance in the first place?
Yeah, so according to family legend, I danced before I could talk. So it really was like my language really was the body. And I think there's something really elemental about the way that I relate to the world is through a dance. So it's not just the body, it's the body in movement, which relates to how I feel and how the world is happening around me. So for some reason, that always made sense to me. And supposedly I was very dedicated, but I didn't really think that you could do it as any kind of job. And I was going towards maybe a more academic or maybe legal career when I went to an audition really on the spur of the moment to support a friend. And we both got into dance school. And I kind of thought, oh, well, that's quite unusual. It was very difficult to get into dance school in those days because you got a grant if you were successful. So I auditioned for all the big major schools, musical theatre schools, and suddenly went, I don't really like musical theatre. I mean, I love singing, I love dancing, I love acting, but I don't like all those 3 things in musicals.
Okay.
And that's when I discovered contemporary dance. And I realised that it was an art form that combined history, politics, sociology, research, music, theatre, dance, had a really rigorous discipline, but you could make your own dances up. You didn't have to be a princess in a tutu. Right. You could do something really original. And a lot of the pioneers were these incredible women like Martha Graham or Mary Vigman. And so I discovered London Contemporary Dance School, and that was where I wanted to go. So that's where I went, and I trained in contemporary dance. Probably again thinking I might not ever get a job, but I was lucky enough to be spotted, and I just haven't stopped working I now realise it's nearly 30 years.
Oh, wow, okay.
Whereas how old I am.
Wow. So then I guess, well, it's obviously because a lot of the fellows in the Senate, not all, but a lot of them will be doing more, conventional social science work, for example. Just thinking about that, about dance and how it relates to culture and politics, for example, because a lot of people, probably including myself, even though I have been to ballet and I have seen some of these cultural productions, but how do you sort of get from the history and the politics and the culture to people dancing around on stage? Like, where is the connection there for the layman, for the idiot, somebody like me?
I don't even. No, I do understand, but it is an alchemy sort of process. So I was a dancer first of all, and through that kind of realised I really did have to follow my dream of making my own dances. And so that's a question I ask myself, like what is it that I want to dance about? What is it that I want to make work that is danced about? And once I kind of find the subject matter that I find really fascinating, I'll go on quite a long process of research. So something like Five Soldiers, I knew I wanted to make something about war because I'd made a piece based on Mars, the god of war, and it struck me that war was a human activity and it was an embodied activity. We use our bodies to fight wars, and the aim of a war is to harm or kill other bodies. Even though it can be nation states, it's still a process that happens on the human body. So it took me quite a long time, and I managed to get embedded with the infantry battalion. So I spent weeks training with the 4th Battalion, the Rifles. And I went from being an observer or almost like an embedded journalist, to being actually a participant.
Oh, really?
And training with them and getting accepted by the group into their exercises. So by the end of it, I was actually playing in enemy insurgent against a rival battalion.
Wow.
And commended for my bravery, which blew my mind, because I stepped over lines that I wasn't expecting to do. I followed that up with a kind of 2-week residency at Headley Court. And by then, the soldiers that I trained with were coming back with injuries from Afghanistan. So it started not just being research, but actually like real people's kind of experience of going to war, fully able, trained soldier, and coming back like profoundly disabled. And I kind of went away and sort of processed this and thought, read my literature, read my history, looked at war art, war poetry, war photography, but realised the medium of their job is the body. So maybe I could make a show that got across to audiences what it actually felt like to be a soldier, and how the physical training affects the mental training, affects the psychology, the fear, the relaxation, the banter, for want of a better word, why the humour is part of their life, and also the kind of long-term impacts of war. So that show, Five Soldiers, I'd say had a deep intellectual core, a really practical field research aspect, but the result was something that communicated like immediately, like in the gut, to audiences what these wars, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan, may have felt like for a soldier. So we had like one real tough commander came in, looked like press gang, like, what is this I'm being told to see? And he watched the show. It's like 1 hour, 5 minutes, full on, non-stop. And by the end, he was at the post-show talk and he said, I just feel like I've been through a 6-month tour of Afghanistan in 1 hour. So it's extraordinary. So I love getting, like the details right, the observations right. But I love going like behind that, like what's going on, what's happening to people's psychology. So I suppose in a long way to say that there's a deep research methodology to my work. And that lends itself also to sort of academic analysis. And so I like kind of going both ways. I like creating the artwork, but I like having a strong research sort of foundation to it as well.
And how common is that approach in dance generally, or contemporary dance? I mean, if you were to sort of look at others, your contemporaries, and what they're up to.
I'd say like the arts tend to be very siloed into kind of like the performance world, the touring world, and then the arts academia, and never the twain shall meet, or only at very odd intersections. Sometimes the space of like the art gallery is the space where that will meet. So for me, actually enjoying working in both, using rigorous methods, but having a real drive to produce work that doesn't sit just in the ivory towers, but actually gets out to the public. I think that's quite unusual.
Okay, yeah, and because often in the arts, I mean, this is painting with a very broad brush. There's this view that the artist has a sort of superior sensibility, and you don't want to sort of get down to the sort of crass tastes of the plebs, and that you want to, and this is partly also where abstraction and things that maybe are very difficult to understand tend to be, that's what the critics like, right? Often you'll get, it's like with movies, you'll get the sort of Rotten Tomatoes score, and then you'll get what the critics think. Do you find that in the sort of dance world there is that view that no, we're going to challenge people's sensibilities, typically politically, we're not going to reinforce any of their I won't say stereotypes, but we're going to go against traditional roles. For example, we're going to sort of have women doing non-traditional things, men doing non-traditional things. To what extent do you think that worldview exists within the dance world?
Right, so that's quite huge. So to break that down a little bit, I'd say the kind of the fashion to go into an ideological conformity is spread across all the arts at present. However, alongside that, there's a strain of the arts that used to be called participatory arts. And I used to do quite a lot of that. So that's like being trained to go out into communities and work with, I don't know, disabled people, or I work with some really amazing artists that pioneered this kind of work. The UK is seen as really kind of a forerunner in this type of work. And strangely, that work has now become increasingly fashionable. So I don't know if you've seen the sort of like co-curatorial sort of stuff that's happening in museums where it's work by community members. So you no longer see the work by the artists of the collection of the art gallery. You'll see this community project or community dancers on the main stage. So there's a kind of strange mix where I'd say they feel like very virtuous because they are doing community work, but that's actually strangely lowered standards and kind of excellence in other ways. So there's all sorts of strange things happening. It isn't just one thing or another. It's concurrent forces that's ended up through probably other, maybe socioeconomic reasons, why the arts has become its own very progressive bubble.
Okay, yeah, because I was kind of going to get into that next, which is the idea of where the pressure to conform, first of all, how much conformity is there? And secondly, the pressure and where it's coming from. So because it's quite complex with the arts. You've got the building where it's happening and which may be charging money. So you have some kind of a commercial imperative. You have arts councils.
Yeah.
You have professional bodies. You have the sort of dance schools and what they're teaching the pupils. You have the pupils themselves, why they're self-selecting into. So, I mean, in terms of this ecosystem, where is the pressure, to be very crude about it, the pressure to be woke, is that coming primarily from the top down, or is it coming because that's what people want who are entering the
No, and you described that really well because you've basically, as an artist, as a practicing artist, you have like at least 4 or 5 different forces around whether you'll ever get your work made, commissioned, seen, performed. Your first one is your funder, and so that's top-down incentivization. You've got to be able to speak their lingo, and their lingo has changed to become far more ideologically driven. I think at first, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we used to pay it lip service, but do what we wanted to do. Yeah. I don't know what that point was where suddenly everyone started believing it, but they seem to have to believe it in order to fill the forms in. So that's the first pressure. The second, you're absolutely right, the theatres, the venues have programmers, have directors, have curators. They have their own language and they'll choose what they want to see and what they don't want to see. And they often have become the superstars, or they almost want to have more fame and more power and more money than the artists themselves. So they're kind of intermediaries between the funders and the artists who have huge power over what gets seen or commissioned. You're absolutely right. Who you work with. So I work in dance, so I've got young people. They're coming up through a system that very much is training them to become activists rather than artists. And there's definitely been a loss of meaning as to what the purpose of art is, if you're an artist, not just in social circumstances, but you yourself, what you should give, how you should train yourself, where you should maybe like kind of withhold judgment and actually participate willingly and fully in the making of something collectively. Then you've got the critics, and I'd say actually the critics are pretty good. There seem to be, I think, in this movement, they're a bit more on the side of the artists and a bit less for conformity. I think they've been quite good at calling out some of this stuff across the
really?
board.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
So I think the critics are independent thinkers. And so they see what's been going on. And finally, and it is finally, you have the poor audience who are also the taxpayer that's funding the very first step. Yeah. And they don't seem to come into this debate. I'd say there's been one great case with the Hogarth exhibition where the audience and the press were so shocked by the labelling that Tate Britain had put on. Do you remember the furore about the racist chair?
Yeah.
I think that was one of the best examples where actually the audience and the critics pushed back and it made a difference. And Tate Britain stepped back from that kind of hectoring. But there's not enough of that been going on recently.
How interesting. Yeah, it is such a complicated system
Yes.
of all these actors interacting and creating this web. But there are pressure points, as you say. You know, sometimes the critics, sometimes the audiences will push back on that. But in terms of, you know, just in terms of the art form, you know, is there any, one of the questions I also often ask about different types of art is whether you could get, for example, let us say you were creating something from the Shakespearean era. If you want to do a Shakespeare play or Shakespeare influenced dance routine or something, and you had an, you know, let's say you had an all white, all male cast, would you come in immediately for savaging by every layer of this ecosystem? I mean, I'm just curious. Like, if you were to say, well, no, this, I want to recreate it exactly as it was, the clothing, and we can't, you know, we can't have this diversity because it wouldn't fit the time. You know, how would that be received in a world where I presume, you know, equality of representation of the demographic of today is a dominant, overriding, you know, paradigm?
So I've got the best example of the opposite, which is my own Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
So I did an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, and okay, I'm contemporary dance, so I want to make it relevant to contemporary times. I spent about 5 years researching it. I embedded with West Midlands Police, on the beat, sometimes at times far more dangerous than being with the army. I worked with gangs across both divides in Birmingham, and I worked with several key schools in some of the most deprived areas of Birmingham, including Spark Hill, which is a predominantly Muslim area, and I sort of taught for a year doing
Great
workshops.
name, by the way, Spark Hill. What do you think of, you know? Yeah.
And so I made a Romeo and Juliet that was looking at contemporary gang culture and had quite a multiracial cast because it reflected Birmingham. And actually, that's probably part of what led to my own cancellation, was because suddenly it hit at the time of defund the police. I trained with the police. Black Lives Matter. I was putting black trauma on stage because there was gang and knife crime, and white appropriation because I'm a white artist. Yeah. So actually, you can't.
Perfect storm.
You can't win. Of course, that's not why I got cancelled, but it certainly was in the lead up to, like, who the hell am I to make art, to do anything? It doesn't matter what your credentials are. It doesn't matter that you're endorsed by gang members and all the rest of it. It didn't matter. It was just the fact that I was a white woman looking at it.
Sort of like a cultural appropriation sort of charge.
Yeah. I mean, actual fact, the reviews were great. It wasn't anything actually about racism. It was to do with young people and tensions and sex more than race, but that didn't matter. It was just the act of doing it. Now, to go back to your original question, which, you know, could you do an all-male white show? In theory, yes. In practice, I think there would be a cultural taboo over that. And in fact, I do have an artist who was cancelled. He was told he had to have a black cast member. He couldn't find the right cast member. He felt it was a matter of artistic integrity, and the project was shelved. So you will get your project cancelled if the people commissioning it feel that that's inappropriate.
Interesting. Yeah. So these pressures. So and I guess related to that is then the question of what art is not being produced. You know, clearly the question of how is this damaging the arts and its ability to connect with a public, you know, because what art isn't being produced, presumably a lot of things that would connect to people where they are is out of bounds now. I mean, obviously that mention of a sort of an all-white male cast, for example. So there are a lot of spaces that are heavily all-white male, right, or female, or, you know, and those would not be reflected in the arts. And similarly, you know, very female, stereotypically female roles or stereotypically male roles might be difficult because you would be accused of reinforcing some kind of gender norm. Or
unless you did something like Barbie, you know, you have to be very self-knowing about these things because I think bright artists realise that that yet playing with these stereotypes is kind of fun and exciting, and something we all used to do until 5 minutes ago was mix and play. So if you say, for example, going back to our all white, all male cast, you'd have to be making some comment about maybe white incel culture. That would be the way that you'd get it through.
Okay.
I've lost.
But just like a sort of boy meets girl type, traditional. I mean, if you saw that a bit with Snow White, right? Something that is sort of traditional like that, which clearly has a resonance because it clearly did well, and resonates. Now, it's not to say everything obviously shouldn't be like that, but to do a little bit of traditional or too stereotypical, which has a resonance like that. It sounds like that kind of art cannot be done anymore. Is that fair to say?
So you have a very big administrative bureaucratic class in the arts, and they tend to be the one that make the decisions. And I think that's got much heavier. There's way more arts admin degrees and MAs than there ever used to be. They just didn't used to exist before. So they hold more sway, and that's the class that's making decisions about what gets commissioned, what gets funded, what gets marketing budgets, what gets pushed. You've got an infantilized artistic class who have less power, less sway. I think there's been some such serious kind of attacks on famous artists that no one's out of the firing line. Nobody. No one's too rich or famous to be attacked now. So I think artists, just for self-preservation, start to self-censor. And the research we've done at Freedom in the Arts really is starting to show that up. We picked it up in the first report last year. A poet was saying, 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, I wrote this poem from the very controversial viewpoint of a rather vulnerable female who was involved in sex work. And it was this kind of like really elaborate experimental poem. He said, I don't think I'd even think about writing a poem like that. I think I'd stop myself even thinking that. I'd be too scared. I'd immediately think, well, what would my attack and criticism be? So the self-censorship's very deep, very in the very genesis of that moment of creation, where you have to kind of let yourself think the wrong thoughts to get yourself excited, to kind of, before you even tell anyone else, you need to allow yourself to think and imagine first. So what we're doing at Freedom in the Arts is we've actually commissioned a bit of research to specifically look at, we want to find 5 works of art that definitely would have been made, that weren't made because of this culture. And so that's got to be like decent artists, they've got to have decent evidence that it was cancelled for their views, or it was inappropriate, or there was like too much fear and risk. And I can think of a few cases where that's definitely happened.
Wow, yeah, so. Tell me a bit more about the reports and what you're picking up, because I remember there was a report on the arts a few years back, and I can't remember where it was like 80, and I was surprised because I thought, people in the arts I thought were completely all bought in on cultural progressivism, radicalism, and what was surprising was like 80% of them were saying that you can't be a Brexiteer, you can't, they were talking about this climate of fear, and that was, I think, 2018 or 19 or something. But you've done more recent research, yeah.
So I think you're talking about, there was a great report came out 2019 by Arts Professional that was about growing censorship in the arts.
I think that was the one.
And we thought that was a fantastic survey. I wish I'd read it at the time.
I
might have learned something.
Right.
And so we at Freedom in the Arts, we replicated that survey almost exactly, actually, to have a comparative study between 2018-19 and our survey, which was 24-25. And it went from originally 30% of artists saying they rarely, never, or only sometimes speak freely, to 84%, this enormous jump. So people are aware of it, they saw that things were happening, but it felt sort of managed in 2019 to like the overwhelming vast majority of anyone in the arts saying they just don't speak freely at all. Oh. So that was our first report, and I felt like we were just beginning to really understand how to evidence gather, how to really put it in front of people and say, here is your evidence. Because there was quite a lot of people saying, oh, it's awful, how terrible for you personally, or terrible anecdotes. But we needed to kind of show that this is really big, this is really widespread, and this is happening to more and more artists, as well as like start to build a network of artists as well. Like we're a safe place that you can come and talk to, like, you can trust us. So we've just published our second report, which is even bigger, and that looks at what we're calling the new boycott crisis. So boycotts particularly are coming in around issues to do with Israel, Palestine. It's affecting music festivals, literature festivals, sponsorship. That's really hitting big business, commercial arts. And we're showing how the patterns that they're used around the trans and sex and gender debate, or around critical race theory, the patterns in the play are being used now around the Middle East issues. And now it is just a culture of boycotting, silent boycotting. But we've also got evidence from venues, how helpless they feel, what to do with the complaints, both from inside their staff and from activists and from agents and promoters who are kind of caught right in the middle between artists on the one hand and venues on the other. So we're trying to widen out both between the subsidised and the commercial arts, and also all the slightly different roles within the arts as well.
Boy, yeah, because it's quite a complicated picture there that I think with James Esses, I was talking about how with the police, you could be reasonably sure that the rank and file officers aren't woke, but it's coming from on high and they're just obeying orders. So if you fix what was going on in the HR departments and at the top, then you fix the problem. But in the arts, because so many of the people that are going into it, the personnel, share these views.
Yeah.
They can impose a kind of peer pressure-based conformity, even if you somehow were able to fix the funders and the venues and even the critic. So I kind of...
And the arts have always been a bit mad, you know? That's all right. I'm okay with that. There are deep worrying fundamentals around like who goes into arts training now, because like I said, when I managed to get a place, you had to go through this massive audition process, super rigorous, and when you finally got to what was a dance conservatoire, it was such a socioeconomic mix of people. We were all given grants because we were the most talented, and we'd been through a really rigorous process, and I didn't realise what a golden age that was. Now, why on earth would you go into the arts, saddle yourself with this enormous debt for such an unstable and unprofitable working life? That's got to be only for the privileged few who can be subsidised or can basically do it as a hobby. And so that's really and so that's really feeding into our workforce at a sort of grassroots level.
And is this because it's now more expensive to get to the place where you're selected and maybe the salaries are less or the security is less? Is it that? Because in journalism, for example, it is less secure now because of the downsizing of the papers, and so the amount of training you have to have a journalism degree, whereas you didn't have to in the past. So only people who come from a wealthier background can get through that process now. So that there you could see in journalism why it is self-selecting for a certain kind of elite background. But in the arts, what's changed in that regard? Is that?
I think this merits its own piece of research, and it's sort of deliberately freedom in the arts has not gone into education because it's a whole other ecosystem. But anecdotally, and I did used to work a lot in dance education, there used to be a lot more grassroots figures in most towns, most cities. I went to a dance school where it was £1 for a ballet class, that you would turn up every single day for your training. The teacher understood the sort of the pathways into the profession. And for something like my art form, especially as a female, you have to start so young and you have to train rigorously from about the age of 6, 7 years old. Now, there seems to be less and less people doing that sort of work, it's much, much more expensive. So that kind of is a barrier. And if it is subsidised, it's only project-based. So even the best projects will only get funding for 6 months, maximum a year. There are some exceptions. The Centre for Advanced Training in Dance tries to talent scout and bring people in and get them training. I think then you've just got this cut-off point where you realise you're paying those fees and your living costs in London or Leeds or major cities, and your job prospects are really poor. We haven't really invested in both the kind of stability in the arts, but then I think also just the whole, like you say, it's such a complicated system and the funding really doesn't work, and the audience is not really able to subsidise in the way it did even 10 years ago.
Okay. So the audience is because there's fewer people watching and therefore there's not as much revenue coming in.
Yeah. And costs have escalated massively. So running a building is just insanely expensive. A huge building like an art gallery or a theatre or anything like that is hugely expensive. And so running costs now eat up any margin of profit that used to take from the commercial hits, your sellouts, would subsidise your arty stuff. Yeah. That margin has been eaten up now by costs.
Boy, I didn't realize that, but I can only imagine the cost of running a theatre in London, for example.
Yeah.
But so, and just in terms of your own story and just what you've been through, maybe tell us a little bit about the kind of cancel culture, that you've faced personally, and you can get into as little or as much detail as you want, but just sort of how that all happened for you.
Yeah, I was having this funny discussion actually about it feels at the moment people have to decide what hill they're going to die on.
Right.
And everyone's sort of dying on different hills. You never know which hill it is you're going to die on until you are on it.
Right.
With your flag going, oh shit.
Right. That military training probably came in handy.
Well, quite. And I think there's a directness to me that maybe that fitted quite well with the military. It doesn't fit with the arts so well. And if I've gone away and I've really looked at something and I've really researched something, like the whole thing around sex and gender and what was happening with this consultation with the government, in Theresa May's government, about loosening self-ID, looking into what was happening with the medicalisation of children, with this new identity of trans. I'd really done my research. I really knew what I was talking about. And I thought that I was fairly respected for doing this. Little did I know that this was a hill and I was about to die on it. Because, of course, I've been vindicated, but at the time it was a very hot, difficult COVID moment. I was running a big, regularly funded Arts Council dance company. I was actually in a very vulnerable position and I didn't realise that. I thought I was in a stronger position than I was. I spoke out about women's rights, but only in the privacy of my own home.
And that was enough?
And that was enough. And actually, a whole series of kind of events led to me realising that it was better for me to stop the nonsense that was happening to me and start again. My integrity was more important to me than hanging on to something that I thought would have been a lie.
Right.
So I did make that decision myself, both to kind of leave my company, which was called Rosie Kay Dance Company, and also go public, because I felt like I wanted to make a stand about the way that artists were being bullied and treated, both by the junior members of the company, but they were being fueled and encouraged by my management and my board, which I was probably more angry about, actually, to be honest. Yeah. So that shifted the trajectory of my life and my work, my artistic pursuit. I don't regret it at all, because it means I've got the real experience. When I talk to other artists, even last night I was speaking to a poet, I really know what they're going through. I really do sympathise. And I really am able to say, you need to decide which direction you want to go with this. You are still in control, even if it feels like you're not.
Yeah, I mean, it's and good for you, but it's obviously not everybody is wired this way, like you or James or others, right? So there's something different
right.
about
what is it about us?
Yeah. But then clearly, I mean, very, very rarely do you hear of somebody who made the choice to, be true to themselves and regretted it, right? So it doesn't seem to be the pattern. But
there were some dark nights of the soul, don't get me wrong, and there were some very scary moments where the whole thing almost unhinged me entirely. I started to, because if everyone's shouting and telling you what an evil, wrong person you are and your thoughts are wrong, it's a witch hunt, and you think maybe I am the witch, maybe I am.
How interesting, yeah.
And I was lucky I had a very good GP and a very good psychiatrist that just went, no, you're fine. Because my job is to make things up in my head and imagine things. So I was kind of like teetering on the edge. And so I'm aware at how destabilizing all of this is. But as soon as you go, no, this is wrong, talk yourself through and out of it, I suppose it gives you a different sense of like yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting, because also not everybody has the language to understand the language games they're playing. Behind a label like trans inclusive, behind a label like compassion for the marginal, all of these kind of what's on the tin. If you open the tin up and you see what trans inclusive means, cutting out body parts and chemically castrating, and geez, but that's not how it's advertised.
No, that's right.
And a lot of people just can't get below those labels.
That's right.
And it's very hard unless you know the game that's being played, right?
And you also expect this kind of level of good faith, like good faith argument that you are, I am a good person, I do care that you're upset, or I am trying to tell you this because I want you to know that there are two sides to this argument, and transphobia means actually believing that sex is real. That's what it also means, Sure. And when you're dealing with, people that are governors or trustees, like to also see this kind of shutting down when you're like, but hang on, there's got to be, this sense of civil society and conversation and debate and good faith, that went all out the window as well, which is really like really shocking, because the people I was involved with were part of my life. They'd been at my wedding, my son's christening, and it just felt so like hello, hello, where's the humanity to me? And it wasn't there. It was so odd, and I see that now time and time again, and it's still utterly shocking and bewildering how vulnerable humans are to madness.
Yeah. It's once you download that software that says the number,
good, bad.
And the number of oppression points. If it's higher, it's a higher card. You win. That's it. There's no debate, right? And so once you kind of are in that world, then the person with lower oppression points is arguing against the one with higher. The trans, woman arguing against the trans. It goes against the religion, and immediately you shut down because you have a very simple rule which just says you can't do that because you've got to be the ally and you have to step behind because you have fewer points, and then you dehumanize the person who is seen as the oppressor. They're completely dehumanized and they don't count it at all.
And because I've encountered it absolutely firsthand, up close and personal, this idea that it's all just fueled by fear or cowardice. Now that does play a role, but not the full role.
Right.
There are sincere beliefs going on there that seem to only just start and stop at the top of the mountain and never go down into the roots. Exactly like you're saying, like it's just a game of trump cards.
And what's interesting about those people, sometimes you see this a bit in politics where somebody like a Theresa May, or you have these people who would have been saying trans women are women, deal with it. That would be their approach. And if you were to go against that, you were an awful person. Now, once the wind shifts enough that that's no longer what you say, they'll act as if they never actually believe that anymore. No, I'm now, no, of course, gender critical, and so people can shift and memory hole where they were. That's kind of the way in which these taboos seem to shift, as they just completely memory hole where they were. It's kind of interesting.
Or I've heard people recently sort of say, really compassionate and you were right. I just decided to never make a stand. So it's almost like a sort of quantum belief system that is neither one thing nor the other, so they can't be blamed because they never took a stand.
Oh, I see. No, but this is so interesting, this this true belief thing that people to themselves, it's not just fear of being shamed publicly, but even in their own head, they've convinced themselves. There's this whole psychological theory around that you kind of have an audience in your own head passing judgment on you. And so I think that's what's going on, right?
And maybe us crazy people like the Helen Joyces and the Maya Forsyth and the James, maybe we've got a different type of audience, like that's telling, I don't know, or maybe we sit with our audience and discuss. I don't know, that's a really interesting thought. I like that.
Yeah, this sort of, which is often some reflection of public morality or what's seen as the norm, and you've just imbibed that and it judges you, and so your conscience is judging. So it's kind of interesting that a number of people like you have broken out of that. So I know we only have a little bit more, but we have a little bit more time. I was just going to sort of move on to some of your academic interests, and that's sort of where the center comes in, and your thoughts about the academic side to what you do. So tell us a bit about that, or any research plans. And
well, I'm super excited. I mean, I was always interested in academia and find, just the rigorous analysis of the arts and applying that to practical arts and performance rather than just theoretical. So that's always been an interest. And one of my first encounters was creating work that could be analysed by neuroscientists and psychologists to see if we could understand more about how we watch dance and what's actually happening with the brain. And that influenced quite a lot of my early works because, to sort of paraphrase, when we look at dance with Bach or Mozart, we're pattern recognition creators. And so the audience sits and puts the dance with the music and gets great pleasure from that, if you choreograph well. Yeah. But if you choreograph, say, to breath or silence, bodies hitting the floor, breath, sweat, audiences either love it or they hate it. And they love it and hate it for the same reason, which is they feel it more they describe it as feeling it in their gut. And that's a different part of the brain entirely, which is to do with kind of like physical mirroring and response. So it either feels really physical and human and they love it, or they find it really physical and human and they find that a bit distasteful.
Okay.
So I really like that in my work because I play with music and I play with the body and the sound of the body, because I know that in my audience there's going to be lots of different brains processing this in totally different ways. So let's give them different things that they can like and dislike. I did a talk at Oxford around my field research with 5 soldiers, and the professor of anthropology heard me talk and said, "You do realise what you're doing is anthropological field research?" And I went, "What's that?"
Yeah. Okay.
And I think because my mum's a sociologist, I'd asked her very early on about research methods, and she'd really helped me understand how to interview people, how to go into different environments, how to build bodies of research that could inform my work. So I spent a year at Oxford as the artist in residence through the Lever Home to the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography. And it just gave me such a good, solid grounding in anthropologic and ethnographic research methods. And I loved this idea of new practice, which now I'm so worried feels a bit woke, but actually doing research through the body, through embodied practice, through the arts, but actually taking something from it that's anthropological. So we did this huge project at Oxford over a year with women who had eating disorders or disordered eating. And I taught them dance from like very base principles to the point where they were equipped to choreograph a solo about their eating disordered experience. And the beauty of dance is you can be happy, you can be sad, it can be the past, present, and future, it can be everything in a 3-minute solo. And then we interviewed them ethnographically about their medical experiences. So it sounds now, it sounds a bit wacky, but it was very beautiful, very considered work about how the body tells a story about the body.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So your research interest is in how art is received and analyzing that and feeding that back into the art.
Yeah, and the anthropology and ethnography and sociology. are looking at human and human behaviours, and part of that is a physical and embodied reality. We all have bodies, and we actually relate to each other through these bodies. And when you put more than one person together, you suddenly have duets, trios, quartets, you have mass movement. And these shift and shape culture and ideas, as well as just writing and talking about things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole area called sociology of emotions, which is all about emotional contagions and things.
Yeah.
Or certain interactions create certain emotions, like marching.
Yes.
Under flags, gets everyone thinking about the nation, these kind of things. So there is that whole literature about emotions mattering and not just cognitions. So.
Yes, and I suppose because I come at it with a very, I'm not trying to just live in a theoretical world. Like, I'm a real hard-nosed, clear-eyed, practical choreographer. It either works or it doesn't. You can either sort of draw patterns and conclusions. It's not just about what I think might be happening. It's like I have to move 1,000 people from A to B. That's got its own function. The military know how to do it. Choreographers know how to do it. There are issues that happen along there. If they're all marching and in time, it's a lot faster.
Okay.
So it's not just about the emotions; it's about the physical practicality of concepts as well.
Right. How interesting. Yeah, it's such a very different world from my world. But just to wrap it up, like I'm kind of interested in the can art be traditional? So could you have a nationalistic choreography, a religious choreography, this sort of thing that might be, because it seems there's very little in the art world now that would speak to anything conservative, for example, or nationalistic or religious. I mean, is that something that is even remotely possible within the arts as it is at present? Now, obviously, it's not to say that that's the way it should all be again, but it seems like you would be very hard pressed to find anything like this. Am I right?
Well, so I would say that we need to return to the question of, like, is it good art or not? Like, that really needs to be the primary question. Do we have diversity of viewpoints? At the moment, it's all very skewed over here. What's happening to these artists that maybe don't have the same viewpoints? Why are we not seeing them? Maybe there's some really good art there. And rather than it being just about the end point, there's got to be some sort of processes that are affecting that. And then I would just sort of say, well, there's an interesting point around, like, tradition in art, because actually there are some amazing traditions. There's a reason why ballet has existed and still exists. It's incredibly pedagogic. It's handed down from master to student, like person to person, body to body. It survived revolutions and war because of this form that it holds. There's a reason opera has survived as well. There are traditions that survive and shift and move and need custodians to look after it, that can have an exploration into modernity but come back. And there, I think that's where we're probably going to get through. There are practical, disciplined, technical skills that feel traditional but actually are about our real ability to make good art. And because some of those real practical skills have been lost in the conservatoires, and it's about thoughts and feelings and activism, actually, I would say not just traditionalism and not just ideology, but real practicality of skills and disciplines and excellence is probably a way through that is not ideologically driven, but is artistically driven.
Yeah. So, and I guess in art, it would be like knowing how to use a paintbrush. Or,
yes. No, but what is that teaching you? That's teaching you about how to really look at something, how to really think, spending that time. It's not, yes, you could do it on your iPad or AI, but that's not teaching you those skills. So there's something about that, again, going back to the body, there's something about that physicality and connection with looking and thinking and patience.
Right. Because that's so interesting, because there are these two debates. I guess the critics of the progressive world, one obviously would be critical of the activism and the damage it's doing to people who want to learn skills and make beautiful. So beauty is a casualty.
Yeah.
But the other one is also, it's not reproducing whether it be a national, religious, Western civilizational tradition is not being reproduced. And like with art, you know, once you moved into modernism and abstraction, it was away from traditional ways of seeing the world. And so these are two separate critiques.
I
And I
know,
don't know
and I think like we all absorbed that the lesson of Nazi art, didn't we? I mean, my university dissertation was on Weimar and Nazi art, and then particularly dance and choreography and mass movement. And I think like we all took on board that lesson of fascism, fascist art, and that has dominated as the far right. Whereas I think the Soviet equivalent of the far left, the communistic art, became cool.
Right.
You know, that's a very simplistic sort of argument. But that sort of entartete Kunst, the degenerate art exhibition versus the fascist realism, has tainted nationalistic, realistic art, sadly. And I don't think that's fair to the art. But that's the legacy we've kind of been left with.
Right. Yeah. So there's no rebalancing in sight. Okay. So just really to end up here, well, where can people find you really? I mean, and if they want to know about Rosie Kay's choreography or what's the best place for people to go?
So I'm pretty much on X a lot. So I'm
Aren't we all? Yeah.
Rosie Kay, K2Co. So K2CO, Rosie Kay. I've got website, Rosie Kay, K2Co, and also freedominthearts.com. So you Google Rosie Kay and I should come up, hopefully, along with some stories, I'm sure.
Rosie, fantastic. It's been great. We're delighted to have you at the center, and keep up the great work.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric.